All right, so tonight I'm talking about the age of the earth. And the reason I'm talking about the age of the earth is I've had 2 or 3 people in our congregation come and ask me, they know I'm a creation scientist, so they ask me why it's important. Why can't I believe in evolution? Why can't I believe in millions of years? Why can't I believe in the old earth? And I tell them, it's important. It's not a salvation issue, but it is one of consistency. If you believe the Bible in what it's telling you, you need to believe Genesis as well as Exodus, as well as Matthew, as well as Philippians. It's all important. Everything in the Bible is important. So having that understanding, and because Genesis is fundamental to the foundation of everything that we know, it's the beginning. That's what Genesis means. And so we're trying to learn and trying to teach people how to understand what went on, and it will absolutely be 100% congruent all through the Bible, that there's nothing that speaks against it. And so let's get started. And I want to welcome you out there that are watching this on YouTube or any other means. And we thank you for joining us, and we hope you learned something. If you have questions, you can send it in, and we'll try to answer them. So we have a mission statement. Our group is called BCS, which stands for the Biblical Creation Science. And our ministry, we exalt Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior. We teach the truth in the Bible. We try to equip you, the saints, to witness to the world. And we actively try to disciple the world through these videos and through our personal one-on-one interactions with people in order to get the message out. And so the motto is showing the truth of the Bible and special creation by examining the evidence of science. So the Bible is our reference that we always go to, but science, we have the revelation of nature, what God made, as it's told in Romans, that people are without excuse, because it's clearly seen that there is a God that is all-powerful and interacting with the universe in order to make things happen, and that is very clear. So that's what we pursue. So going to give a few reasons up front. Recent creation is important to Christians because, number one, of the truth of the Bible. You know, we're absolutely devoted to the idea that every word in the Bible is God-breathed, as it says in Timothy, 2 Timothy. It's useful for teaching and for correction. So the Bible, as it's read, is clearly saying that the earth is young. It tells us it took God 6 days to make everything that we see. It tells us that again, and not only in Genesis, but it tells us that in Exodus 20:11, in the 10 Commandments, when God is defining the Sabbath. He says he made everything in creation in 6 days and rested on the 7th, and that means that we're supposed to use that pattern of our life, 6 days of work and 1 day of devotion. We should be devoted to God all the time, but we worship Him and hold that day holy. So that's the first thing. So it says so in the Bible, and a lot of people I ask that say, oh, well, you know, the scientists have proved this and they've shown that and everything. And I said, is God the kind of entity that would mislead His people for thousands and thousands of years? Up until, you know, very recently, last couple of 100 years, we had no idea of what was happening. You know, if people were speculating about evolution or people were speculating about millions of years of age, That only happened in the 18th century. And so why would God let his people have misunderstanding for all of those years between the time? And these people are farmers, and they grew wine and had animals, sheep and goats. So these aren't people who are reading the internet every night. So this is something the Bible, the words in the Bible have been around for thousands of years. And it tells us in 2 Timothy, all scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching. So that's what we're trying to do. So creation is important to Christians, second reason, to witness to others. You know, in one sense, if God said it, you know, it's true. But he also tells us to be prepared to give a reason in Peter. And so we need to teach ourselves so that if somebody challenges us or somebody is inquisitive, not necessarily challenging, you tell them something, and because of the process of people being taught certain things, they're resistant. Oh, gee, I thought animals evolved. Or, oh, I thought we had a big bang, and all of these different things that have come in recently. But, you know, it's not necessarily the truth. And with love, we're always told to deal with people in love, is to show them what they should be thinking about and to investigate it themselves. The Acts 17:11 talks about the Bereans, the people, the Jews that lived in Berea, and they were supposedly more noble character than the Jews, because they were eager to examine the scripture every day to see if what Paul was teaching them was right. And that's what we need to do when we're being taught something, even if it might not seem on the face of it to be religious. It may have religious connotations. So we have to be skeptical, but we have to go back to our source, which is the Bible, and see if it fits in. And that's why, again, we use the Bible as our touchstone. And then the third overarching idea is to save our kids. And unfortunately, where we are today, and with the public school system, the secular school system, the teaching of evolution in all its different forms have come in, and the children are bombarded with that. And they're not only bombarded with that in schools. You think about television. They just had a long series called Cosmos, which was also talking about the evolution of the universe, and we're just coming out, or they've just opened up with the third or fourth version of Jurassic Park. So you don't think that's telling the kids a story about evolution and dinosaurs, which are, you know, exciting and fun to think about. So, you know, I think the Lord gave us an idea that this was coming. Timothy, guard what has been entrusted to your care. Take away from godliness chatter and opposing ideas of what is falsely called knowledge, or you might say science. So in the last, again, 150, 160 years, with the advent of the old earth through Charles Lyell, and with the advent of animals reproducing, starting with a single-cell creature through Charles Darwin, and all of the other ideas, this is telling us that we are being bombarded, and the Bible is timeless. So this recommendation to Timothy might have meant one thing in his day, but it means certainly something very different to me. And so I was introduced to this video by my good friend Hugh. So let me play this if I can. And this is going to talk, so this is from an organization based in Australia, but they have branches in the United States and Canada and other places around the world. This organization is a creation organization, creation.com. And this video is talking about what they have found They have given lectures all over the world. They've given over 1,200 lectures throughout the world, and they talk to college students. And this is kind of a summation of what they've found from talking to college students. Now remember, these might be just beginning college students, so these people that you're talking to, these are people who have these ideas from middle school and high school. So let me play that.
66 to 88% of young people are leaving the church never to return. And you will see a direct correlation with those who remain in the faith and those who left the church.
Creation or evolution, which do you believe?
I'd probably have to say evolution.
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 In your church background, were you ever exposed to any scientific evidence for creation by the church leaders, pastors, anything like that?
Definitely. Nothing in particular, no.
I believe so. Do you still attend church today or not anymore?
Only for holidays.
We kind of stopped going to this family, but
You see, there's one worldview that every single person in this country has been exposed to. The idea that evolution is true, that the Bible's account of origins is nothing more than fairy stories. When we demonstrate to believers that the evidence strongly supports the historical account of the Bible, not only is their faith ignited, but they become excited about sharing the Bible's truth with family, friends, neighbours, and even co-workers. Did your church leaders, student leaders, bring in any creation teaching that showed you there was scientific evidence to support the Bible's account of creation?
yes. Yeah, we learned a lot about different creation scientists and proof of their creationism.
Still attend church today?
Yes. Yes, sir. Yeah, there's something.
Okay, well, let me stop that. So I think even though that's a small snippet of the movie, I think it purported to be a 30 to 40 minute movie where they go and interview people, and they have all of the comments that they made. They're not necessarily cherry picking the data. It's one reason that I think it's really important to be sure that we teach creation in our churches and we teach creation in our schools. If we go to, if the kids are going to public school or private school or Christian school or homeschool, they need to be exposed to this. And unfortunately, the vast majority of children, students go to public schools. And I can guarantee you it's absolutely 100% forbidden to be taught in public schools. So that's the thing that's really shocking. And as he said, I don't know if you caught it at the beginning, that they said the statistics show that between 66 and 88% of Christian kids, when they leave the house, either to go to college or to get a job, they fall away from the church. They only attend on Christmas and Easter. So clearly the students are being affected. And what I want to call up is, can we defend what we believe? Can we give reasons to the kids? And in the movie, there was an extended version that I saw that the key thing was, they said, are kids asking questions? If the kid is just going to school and going to Sunday school and participating in youth events and going on camping trips and beach parties and rock or music festivals, Christian music festivals and that, and they're coming home and from school and they're going to a school where they're being exposed to evolution or on television, whatever, and they're not asking questions, they said that is a big point that you're going to have to face, is if they're not asking questions, then they're not digging deep and they're just taking what people are telling them. You know, people in authority that have a lot of letters after their names, and they're being confused. And I would put to you, I think this is a very good slide. the two worldviews, if you have the worldview of what I call evolution in the broader extent, not just the biological evolution, but in astronomy, they have the concept of evolution. The universe exploded into existence out of a big bang. And when you confront the scientists, who are the top scientists purporting to approve of this idea, they say, well, it started with nothing. There was absolutely, positively nothing, and it exploded. So that's the one thing. And versus what the Bible says, in the beginning, God created. And then you go down to, well, how did life begin? Well, they say that life became from some mysterious source. It could be a pool of chemicals that got together, or maybe it was a hydrothermal vent, or maybe that was seeded from outer space. They had a million different postulates, but we know God created life because He told us. And the different forms of life, how did they come into what we see today? We all have eyes. We don't have to be a scientist to see a dog or a squirrel or a gecko crawling up the side of a wall. How did that come about? Oh, well, that started with a single-cell creature that was formed in this step number 2, and it changed over time, millions of years, and it became everything we see. Well, God told us in chapter 1 of Genesis 10 times, everything was created after its kind. The plants were created, the herbs were created, the trees were created after their kind, the fish were created after their kind, the birds, the animals, the creepy crawly things, the beasts, everything was created after its kind. So there's some demarcation. Yeah, there's a lot of different dogs, but there's only one dog kind. And you have a lot of different kinds of cats, because there's a lot of variety in the genome of the cat, but you only have one cat kind. You can't cross a dog and a cat and come up with that. Or a cog. Okay. So this is I think this is one of the key things that I'd like to point out, and that's what we have to be able to defend or to at least explain to kids. And so I have a small challenge to you. So if you think about it, how many generations have there been between Adam and us? How many greats would you put before the word grandfather if you were talking about Adam? He was my great, 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 great. How many greats would that be? So let me see a show of hands. How many think it's more than 1,000? Raise your hand. More than 1,000? Okay, there's 2. How many think more than 500? Okay. How many think more than 200? Okay, all right. Now, let me tell you the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. Here's the cartoon of genealogy, starting with Adam and going through Jesus. We have that genealogy given in Matthew and Luke. And so people think, because we've been bombarded, and it's just part of the society that we live in, that we think there have been these multiple generations. The impression is that, given by evolution, even though we may not believe in it, it still has some effect on us from the outside. So Charles Lyell, who was a lawyer, he actually fancied himself as a geologist. And so he came up, and he was a very anti-biblical person. So he came up with this theory that the Earth was about 75,000 years old. And so to traditional religious people, Christians, that was shocking, 75,000-year-old Earth. And he wrote a book, and Charles Darwin quoted that he took that book with him on his voyage in the HMS Beagle. So he took that and was reading it on those long, lonely nights at sea. But if we reject Lyell's approach to this, and using the Bible, we have some really interesting information. The Bible records Earth's early history between 6,000 and 7,000 years ago in the creation of Adam, the first man, and Eve, the first woman. And there's really two sections of it. The first section that the Bible deals with is from Adam to Jesus Christ, and then the second one is from Jesus Christ to the present. And as I said, the lineage is given in multiple places, but Luke 3 has one. And so let me show you that. The main purpose of this record, here you see Adam is number 2, and Jesus is 77 in line. So if you just take the names in the Bible and all of those begots, and add them all up, you see that is what it is, or you can just go to Luke and it's given to you for free. And one of the things that this author pointed out was he thought one of the main purposes was to show that Jesus was in the lineage of Adam so that he could legally settle the debt that Adam incurred with the original sin. So if you have a family member who has a debt and then dies, then you're legally obligated to pay that debt. So Jesus was not only paying the debt with his blood for all mankind, but he was specifically paying the debt for the original sin of the transgression of Adam and Eve when they disobeyed God in the garden. So I thought that was interesting. But we must remember, so we've got the 77 generations from Adam to Jesus, and we have to remember that the first generations between Adam and Noah, people lived over 900 years and didn't have children until they were 100 sometimes or more. So that's one period of time. But what about the time between Noah and today? Well, luckily there are many royal families throughout the world. There's a royal family in England, there's a royal family in Denmark, there's a royal family that was in Russia before the overthrow. There were many royal families that have kept the records of all of those generations tracing back to the time of Noah and the 3 sons off the ark. And one of them I found was a Queen of England. And this website, which I've referenced down at the bottom, jesusevidence.org, under genealogy, it says the Queen is the 122nd lineal descendant of King David, who's the tribe of Judah. The royal line of the Messiah comes through the tribe of Judah and continues until his second coming. Note the royal standard of England has King David's harp for Ireland. It has the red rampant lion, which is the Scotland, and then the 3 lions of the tribe of Judah. So Jesus Christ is the lion of the tribe of Judah, as it's told in Revelation 5, and he's the King of Kings, as in Revelation 19. So in Genesis, it tells us that the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nation shall be his. So these genealogies have multiple layers of meanings as you read through the Bible, and they're all connected. So in this website, it has all the list of kings, and it goes through it, numbers each one of them, and it goes back, here's one from 565 BC, all the way back, and it's got name. So these are something that these royal families have kept preciously and guarded them so that they would have it as a record, so that they knew what was going on. So when I calculated it, I think the Queen is around the 150th generation now. She's getting on in age, so we are probably a little younger than she is. But so you're about 150 generations removed from Adam. Doesn't seem that far, right? 150. You know, we probably know back 2 or 3 or 4 generations, and if you've ever done genealogy, or you can go to these websites that trace your genealogy. I had an aunt who was a Mormon, and she traced my genealogy back about 20 or so, 30 generations. That's pretty good. So that's amazing. And so we need to be cognizant of that. We're not that far removed from Adam. And so let me jump into the next part. So we've got 10 reasons. I'm going to give, some of them are biblical and some of them are scientific. I'm going to go through some of the reasons that we need to understand that the earth is young. The first of them is, so the question that I ask myself is how to get the earth's chronology. It's from the Bible, using all those begots. So why did God bother to put all of those boring begots in the Bible, or begats? The begats mean that a man, or sometimes a man and a woman, bring a child into existence through reproduction. So if you want to make a graph of it, this is starting with Adam, and the time there is 0, 6 days after creation, on the 6th day. So he lived 930 years, but he had Cain and Abel. They didn't say when Cain and Abel were born, but Seth was the one that, Abel was killed by Cain, and then Cain was sent away. So Seth was born 130 years after creation, and then Enosh, and then Canaan, and then on down. And all you have to do is just look at this front part of how many years it was before the person had children. And Noah, he waited 500 years before he started having children, probably so that the kids were strong and virile enough to help him build the ark. He didn't have to have somebody that was 500 years old building it. He had the fresh young teenagers there. And then after the flood was about 1656 years after creation. And it's all you have to do is go through the Bible, and this gives you the verse right here, and it tells you just have to add them up. Adam, Seth, just go right through it to the flood, and then we continue on after the flood, and Shem, Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, Peleg. So all of these people, they're listed. It's no mystery. It's right there. And so item number 1 is, there are the genealogies in the Bible. That's one of the key reasons I believe the earth is 6,000 to 7,000 years old, in that range. The second reason I believe it is because Jesus told me. Number 2, so this is number 2 of 10. Jesus believed in the young earth. Because when he was asked about marriage, he said, "Have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female?" Well, he was the one that made us, so he should know. That's in Matthew 19. So he said in the beginning, and then down in Genesis 1:1, the words we read in the Bible, in the beginning God created heavens and the earth. So are those the same beginnings? Is there multiple beginnings? I don't think so. Jesus told us that it was at the beginning, and that's the way I read it. There's just the genealogy again. So number 3. So how far back do the records go that we have from archaeology and study of ancient peoples? So the languages, those languages go back to about 3000 BC, and they radiate outwards from Mesopotamia. That Mesopotamia is where the Tower of Babel was. They're actually, if you look on a map in Iraq, there's a little dot that says Babel, so it's not hard to find. If you got Google Maps, you can drive there if you dare. Historical records, how far do they go back? Again, 3,000 years. And those historical records are found both in Mesopotamia and in Egypt. So that's telling us that's about when people started. The oldest people group, again, go back to Mesopotamia. So what are we being told? Man, whom the evolutionists claim have come into existence over 1 million years ago, and the evolutionists say their evolution stopped about 100,000 years ago with humans. Why don't we find civilizations that are 50,000 years old, or 75,000 years old? Why don't we find cities? What about all those dead bodies? You know, why are we not finding them? The evolutionists don't believe in a worldwide flood. They believe in a local flood. So the bodies of people that weren't covered by the flood in that local area, they would still be there. We're not finding them. So that's another reason why I think the earth is young. And then we have historians that have written great books. Flavius Joseph, he was a Jewish army officer. They call him a scholar. He was a scholar, but he was an army officer. He was actually defeated in one of the Roman wars, and as he was taken prisoner, I guess he was given a choice of either having his head removed from his body or working with the Romans. So he chose to work with the Romans, and he became one of their historians. Probably he was a very smart guy, and he adopted the name of his new family that he was brought into, and he wrote a large book, The History of the Jews. And you know, Flavius Joseph is referenced by many different people who study ancient times. What about Bishop Ussher? Again, he was in the Middle Ages, the 1600s. He was a bishop in Ireland. He was not a Catholic, but a Protestant bishop, and he was, by all accounts, one of the smartest and most devoted historians of all time. He sat down and wrote many books, one of which was a 1,600-page volume that had, I think, 12,000 references. And people who want to knock his work, they always say, oh, well, he just used the Bible to get the dates. And he predicted that creation was on 4004 BC. But he's mocked because they say, oh, well, he was just taking the dates out of the Bible. But he didn't do that. He actually meticulously went through these records, and he had access to these annals of the kings and other things. And so he would trace back, and when you read through his book, it weighs as much as a bowling ball, the one I had. It has all of the facts from both the history. He goes through, he studied endlessly Nebuchadnezzar. He had to fill in all of those dates that are missing, the 400 silent years between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And he went back and he did that by correlating what were the Mesopotamians writing at this time? What were the Hittites writing at this time? What were the Egyptians writing at this time? So everything has to fit together. If Egypt loses a battle to Assyria, the Assyrians have to be bragging, hey, we beat the Egyptians, and probably the Egyptians either say nothing, they probably don't say anything because they're so ashamed because they got defeated. But it's all there. He's gone through and done a great job. And in the Bible, you know, we have a list, what they call the Table of Nations, and these are the three sons of Noah, and it has names that we're familiar with. Elam, we know Elam has to do with Iran. So these people are honored. It's like, well, why do we call the state of Washington, Washington? It's honoring a person, Washington. Why do we have St. Louis, and why do we have all of these different names that are affiliated with people? and it's because they're famous people. And we know Gomer and Magog, these have to do with people in the northern part in Asia, and there's also Mizraim. That's, if you go to Germany and you ask somebody to please tell you the name of their country in German, it's Deutschland. If you go to Egypt and you ask somebody to tell you the name of their country in Egyptian, it's Mizraim. So these are the offsprings of these three people, and there are maps that have been put together where the distribution of where these people are. Cush and Put and Lud and Gomer and Magog, those are all Elam. We know where they were. So this just gives more and more evidence of the veracity of what we're told in the Bible in the short period of time, the 6,000 years. And ancient calendars. So we have the European calendar, we have the Jewish calendar, we have the Chinese calendar, and we have the Mayan calendar. So those are pretty distinct people groups. So if I use Bishop Ussher as the representative for the Europeans, he said Earth was created 4004 BC. We add 2018 to it, come up with 6,000, a little over 6,000 years. The Jewish calendar this year, I believe, is 5,778. The Jewish people don't record the 400 years that they were in captivity. So if you add those two back in, then it's 6178. The Chinese, who would probably not have their calendar go back to the actual creation, but it would probably go back to the flood, because they're coming off the ark, and then that people group is going eastward. So their calendar for this year is 4718, and you add the flood years into it, so that's 6374. And then we go over to the Mayans. There they are in South America, and their calendar is starting, and it's been verified that they say it started at 3114 BC plus 2018. You got 5132. So being an engineer, added them up, did an average, so it's about 6,000 years for those calendars. And there's some messing around because they're changing from Gregorian to Julian and different things, but if you just, those are not big changes. The standard deviation is 445 years, so that's 7%. So all of those widely diverse populations that you wouldn't think the Mayans and the Chinese had a lot in common, they're saying that within a spread of 7%, that's what all the calendars are saying. So I think that's another reason I believe what's going on. Okay, let's jump over to science. So we've done the Bible and we've done recorded history and historians. So one of the things that people always say is, well, if you want to date something, use radioactive dating. So I agree. I think that's an interesting way how to date things. And so what you want to look at is something that has a very short half-life. Some of the atomic decay for a radioactive material like uranium, those are millions and millions of years, and so you want something that has a shorter, what they call half-life. The half-life is if you have a pound of this stuff and you weight the half-life, then you've got a half a pound of this stuff, and the other half is decayed into some other element. And then the next half-life, it goes down to a quarter, then an eighth, and so forth, as this diagram is showing you. So with carbon, there's a radioactive isotope called carbon-14, and we're radioactive because we're breathing carbon dioxide in, and some of that carbon dioxide, the carbon in the carbon dioxide is C14. So your wife is radioactive and your husband is radioactive. So just don't turn the lights off or they might glow in the dark. No. Anyway, so a half-life is 5,000 years old. So that's really interesting. And the ratio of the carbon-14 to the carbon-12, which is the normal carbon, is such that there's a small fraction of it. So what happens is you have a tree or some sort of a plant, and it's absorbing CO2 as long as it's living through photosynthesis and making sugar and respirating oxygen back that we can breathe and live. When the tree dies, it stops absorbing CO2. It's dead. It doesn't do anything. It lays there and becomes part of the ground. So what people do to estimate the age of things is to measure the ratio of the carbon-14, which is radioactive, to the carbon, and then they use that ratio to figure out how many half-lives it's been, and so then they can tell within a certain accuracy of how old the things are. But remember, at some point, there's so little carbon-14 left that your instrument can't detect it. So even the world's best detector cannot detect this limit of carbon-14. So it says, what the literature says, these people that do the carbon-14 dating as a service, they say after 50 to 70,000 years, they can't accurately date anything. So anything over a few 100,000 or a million, don't even send a sample because it won't give anything. But when they send samples in and they test them and they measure them and you look, dinosaur bones, a lot of dinosaur bones have been sent in, hundreds and hundreds of dinosaur bones. They've all been dated. They all have carbon-14 in them. They can't be 60 to 150 million years old. They cannot be. What they say is, oh, it's contamination. The dinosaur was in the ground, the rain rained, and then there's a plant that was nearby and it dissolved and it went into the dinosaur bone. Okay, oil. Oil has carbon-14. Coal has carbon-14. So those you might say, okay, they can all be contaminated. Then you come down, diamond is pure carbon. It's the hardest substance known to man. It has very, very, very low diffusion. And that means, and we know how the people do this test to detect carbon-14. They're meticulously about cleaning the sample before they put it in the chamber. It's done in a high vacuum chamber. Then they bombard the surface of the material with an ion beam that cleans, atomically cleans, so that surface is atomically clean to 100%. And then they drill into that material, be it diamond or something, with a beam of ions, and then they take their sample out of that little hole that they drill down. They get carbon-14 in diamonds that are supposedly 3.3 billion plus or minus years old. So here is a metric using the method that, quote, science today loves to quote. It's used for dating things all the time. The Shroud of Turin, you know, anything that's less than 70,000 years old, it can date those kind of objects. And it's in diamond. And they have no explanation for why it's in diamond. The contamination theory is gone. Another thing is you'll find deposits, and here's a striation of rock, and it's basalt, and you give it to the people to do radioactive dating. Now they can't use carbon-14, but they can use other heavier materials that have longer half-lives, and so they date the material. And the people, those tricky guys in Australia, did something where they found some wood, petrified wood, that was in basalt material, and they sent a piece of basalt and they sent a piece of wood. And they had them dated. And so the dating, came back that the basalt was 45 million years old and the wood was 45,000 years old. So if you went into your bank and you asked them how much was in your bank account and you thought you had $1,000, they could either tell you you had $1 if that was 1,000 times smaller, or it could be $1 million, which you probably want to take it out of the bank and run really, really, really fast. That's a poor joke, but you know, it's just telling us that the radioactive dating for these materials that have such long half-lives just can't happen. And then DNA. This is really, really interesting. So in 1995, a Journal of Science published a result where they were looking at the Y chromosome. So the sexual identity of a person is made up. Used to be, this is 1995 I'm talking about, the ladies have two X's, X chromosomes. The gentlemen have an X and a Y. So when the reproduction process happens with the sperm and the egg, then you got a 50% chance it's going to be two X's because the father is the one who defines the sex of the baby. So all of these kings that were killing the queens back in the Middle Ages, they should be ashamed of themselves because they were killing the girls for no reason. It was their fault. So if you got an X from your dad and you'll get an X from your mom, you're a girl. If you get an X from your mom and your dad gives you the Y, you're a boy. So they went back and studied segments of the Y chromosome, and they were expecting to find vast differences. They were looking at, in this first case, they were looking at 38 men of all kinds of ethnicities, Eskimos and people from South Africa and people from Siberia, all over. And they looked at 729 bases pair, this length of the part of the DNA length of the Y chromosome. And they came up with they were all the same. Shock. How can that be? Of course, millions of years, or a million years, the human genome has been evolving and changing and everything. So they went back and did it again and did it again. And this is not, this was over 20 years ago. They've been testing it ever since. And so now they've come up with, and this is scientific. You can go look it up in any of the science books today. Every man alive today actually descended from a single man who scientists now refer to as Y chromosomal Adam. So all of the men alive today have in their ancestry a man, a single man. So we're all traced back to one man. Okay, well, what about the girls? They're also in this. So every cell has something called mitochondria, and this is another organelle inside your cell, and it's the energy generation part of the cell. So this is where chemicals are put together, and it's making like little batteries, and these little batteries, when something has to move or perform a function and it needs energy, then they send these little batteries out to make the cell work. And you only get those from your mom. So they have now determined that there is a mitochondrial Eve, that while the Y chromosome, Y chromosome is from the father, mitochondria is passed from your mother, and it doesn't matter if you're a son or a daughter. So they found out, as we would expect from my talk here, scientists have now found that every human alive today can be traced back to an ancestor, to a single woman, who is now referred to as mitochondrial Eve. So, summing up, what we can say with fair scientific certainty is that every man alive today descended from one man, and every human being alive today descended from one woman. Where have I heard that before? Might be the Bible. Okay, another reason. This is skipping a total new avenue of thought. Dinosaur soft tissue. So over the past years, since before 2000, there's been many people that have been looking at dinosaur remains. And what they found, there was a lady named Mary Schweitzer who was the first one that published extensively on this, but there are hundreds of scientific peer-reviewed journals with these reports in them. So they're not in some obscure Christian literature, they're in Nature, they're in Science, they're in all kinds, Physics Today, all kinds of publications that are the mainline secular science. And they find soft tissue That top left figure is soft tissue. There is osteocytes. These are the cells. That's an osteocyte cell that is used in making bone material. That was discovered by Mark Armitage. And there's even red blood cells. You see the little platelet-like red blood cell, and you see the soft, stretchy vessels, blood vessels, that are conduits for the red blood. And again, if you radiocarbon date the material, it's all between 20 and 30,000 years. So it's much, much shorter than the 65 million years where the dinosaurs are supposed to have gone extinct. And Mark Armitage, he was actually a fellow who came to our church and lectured us on his findings. He brought a triceratops horn. He showed us the osteocytes. He showed us videos of the soft tissue. He was fired by Cal State University. And he sued them and he won for being wrongfully terminated, because there was no reason that he was terminated other than they didn't want this material to get out. I don't know why, but that's, they don't want to be, I guess, thought to support this kind of belief. And so, if we sum up, if dinosaurs lived over 65 million years ago, why did the dinosaur fossil materials still contain well-preserved soft tissue? And here's a whole bunch of pictures. These are all from different samples of dinosaurs. Cells and blood vessels and all kinds of different pieces of soft tissue. And my daughter works at a pharmaceutical company, and she looked up in the library how long this kind of material, DNA, because she works with DNA, how long can it exist when it's buried in the ground? So you have a dead body and you know, so they do measurements on how quickly these things decay, so that they can find out things like how long ago a person died. It's 50 to 60,000 years again, or then the material just physically decomposes. It's not kept in a cryogenic chamber under laboratory control with no light. It's buried in the dirt, right? Exposed to microbes and every kind of other thing. Switching topics again. Another reason I think the Earth is young is the magnetic field. People have studied the magnetic field since Middle Ages. We know that our Earth is acting like a magnet, a giant magnet. It has a solid layer, which is the crust of the Earth and the Earth's mantle, and then it has a liquid area, which is the core, and then there's a solid area because the material is under such intense pressure from all of the weight of the material above it. The liquid material is compressed so tightly it becomes solid again. And so they've been making reliable measurements for many hundreds of years. And so the average intensity of the Earth's magnetic field has decreased exponentially by about 7%, and has been carefully measured since early 1800s. And so by estimating the field intensity in, on, and around the Earth, you can calculate what the total energy is. It's like a bar magnet in the stored field, and the calculation shows that the energy, so the intensity of the magnetic field, the M vector is 7%, but the energy density of that field is decreased by 14% since 1829. And so if you do what the people in secular science do, they take those points, and we can measure them up till today, and you draw a line through them, extrapolate back, and so how far back in history can we go before something breaks down? And here's a calculation that was done. And so here's the field today. And if you go back in time, 2,000 years, 4,000 years, where the flood was, and then back to creation, if you assume that it just decays in a free decay state without anything happening that's unusual, you get that you would only be slightly over maybe 30, 40,000 years. But the belief is that when the Earth underwent the dynamic conditions of Noah's flood, then that had a steep fall off. So it's somewhere, this point is 8,700 years, and this point is maybe 30,000 years. So it has to be in that, it can't be over 30,000 years, or the Earth would have been unstable. And if you go back far enough, if these currents are flowing around, you have resistance. Everybody knows with a resistor, the current, the resistance, that produces loss, and then you have what's called Joule heating, and the item, you know, you touch something where a lot of current's flowing through it, and you burn your fingers because it's heating up, it's about to melt. So it can't be older, because if you believe that the magnetic field has been, you know, decaying, then it has to be younger than that. Okay, skipping again. Okay, number 8 of the 10 reasons. Scientists have found that there's a bacteria that has supposedly been embedded in salt crystals for 250 million years. And they were able to sequence the DNA and also bring it back to life. And so they've named it the Lazarus bacteria for some reason. And they're shocked. You know, so something's wrong. Either all of the physics that people understand about DNA and decomposition of chemicals and breaking of long molecules up through the bonding process or debonding process, either that's wrong or the 250 million years is wrong. So you got your choice, one or the other. You either can say basic physics is wrong, or we're not dealing with millions and billions of years, we're dealing with something younger. And jumping once again, the flood, as I said, the people who usually believe in the old earth believe in a flood that only was in the Mesopotamian area, but they're all over the world. There's seashells at the top of the Himalayan mountains. There's whales in the desert of Peru, the driest place on earth, and the Sahara Desert in Egypt. They have found the Cambrian layers that are supposed to be the oldest life that has evolved. It was 560 million years ago, and there was no fossils lower than that area. It seems like they all occurred right at once, as maybe they were deposited by a giant worldwide flood. And there's also certain kinds of sandstone that occurs all over the world, so that could have been carried from one place to the other during a giant flood, earthwide flood. Also, have you ever tried to bend a rock? Here's this circle is a person, and that person is investigating these rocks that have been bent at a very severe angle. You can only bend, these are sedimentary rocks. Yeah, you can bend the material when it's in a soft, squishy, kind of like toothpaste consistency, but after it's hardened, if you've ever tried to cut tile, as I have, I was very unsuccessful at doing that because it's hard and it's brittle and it kind of breaks. So that's one thing. And then the people always scoff at the Grand Canyon. How can you have a deep canyon formed over a very short period of time? It takes millions of years. Not true. Mount St. Helens erupted, and when it did, it carried down a tremendous amount of material. The ash fell and it formed layers, as you see in these red lines. And here's a person to give you scale. So this canyon was formed within a couple of years after the Grand Canyon was formed. And that happened over just a couple of years. And this is 1/40th the depth of the Grand Canyon. And it didn't need a little river running through it for millions of years. So, you know, here's what I just said. It's a minor catastrophe, but the depth of 400 feet, it's amazing. And then the final one is number 10 of the 10 reasons. Where did all the people go? And you can look at what the reproductive growth is. You now know that we've been steadily increasing in population as the Earth has in the last 100, 200 years. And if you use mathematics to investigate what is happening with the population growth, it follows a curve and it has a certain reproduction rate. And if you go back and say, okay, well, people have been around for 100,000 years. or they've been around for 200,000 years. With a growth rate of only 1/10 of 1%, that's 2.2 children per family, the world population today would be 1 with 93 zeros after it. So that's just the way things grow. You know, it's the old story about the guy who asked for a single grain of rice in the first year, and then 2 in the second, and 4 in the third, and you know, it's a exponential growth. And you don't need very many times, because it's a multiplication factor, to grow to be enormous. So if 8 people got off the vote 4,400 years ago with an average growth rate of 4.7, then we would have, you know, taking into account diseases, the Black Plague and famines and wars and everything, we'd have the population we see today. But we wouldn't have the trillions upon trillions upon trillions of people. So the question is, where did all the people go? They're not here. So in conclusion, let me just conclude by saying, go back to Jesus. You know, that's where we started, that's where we'll end. To review, you know, he said in the beginning, he made them male and female. And it's also said in Genesis that in the beginning. And Jesus is a teacher. He wouldn't lie to us. So, you know, he said in John, I've spoken to you of earthly things and you do not believe, but then you will not believe if I speak to you of heavenly things. So he tells us what he did, and we're not believing him because of the evil of being taught evolution in all its different forms. So the reason that I have as the final and concluding reason why the age of the earth is important to Christians, it really is biblical veracity. So if you can't believe what you're told clearly and repeatedly in the Bible, from the Genesis and in Exodus and in different parts of the Old Testament and also in Luke and Matthew, you're not going to believe the heavenly things. So that's essentially where I stand. And I thank you so much.